Chapter 1. The arrival. The old house next door had been abandoned for as long as Mark could remember. Its weathered walls, faded paint, and sagging roof were relics of another time, another life. But now, something had changed. It was late in the afternoon, the golden light of the setting sun casting long shadows across the field that separated Mark's modest home from the dilapidated structure. He was sitting on his porch, as he often did after a long day at work, enjoying the quiet hum of the countryside. That's when he saw her. At first, it was just a movement, something out of the corner of his eye. But when he turned to look, his breath caught in his throat. She was standing in the tall grass, her skin a deep, shimmering blue, her eyes luminous in the fading light. For a moment, Mark thought he was hallucinating. He rubbed his eyes, blinked hard, but when he looked again, she was still there. She didn't belong here. Everything about her, from her otherworldly skin to the way she moved, graceful and almost ethereal, screamed of something not human. Mark felt a jolt of fear shoot through him, but it was quickly replaced by an overwhelming sense of curiosity. Who was she? More importantly, what was she? And why was she standing in front of a house that had been empty for years? Before he could decide whether to approach her or retreat into the safety of his home, she turned and walked toward the old house. Her movements were smooth, almost like she was gliding, and within moments, she had disappeared through the door. Mark's heart pounded in his chest. His rational mind told him to leave it alone, to forget about what he'd just seen. But something about her drew him in, like a moth to a flame. He needed answers. Chapter 2. A strange encounter. That night, Mark barely slept. His mind raced with questions, his thoughts consumed by the image of the blue-skinned woman. By morning, he had convinced himself that he had to find out more. As soon as the sun crept over the horizon, Mark was already out the door, making his way toward the old house. The grass was wet with dew, and the air was crisp and cool. His heart pounded as he approached the front steps. The door was slightly ajar, just as it had been the night before. "Hello," he called, his voice shaky. There was no response. He hesitated for a moment, then pushed the door open wider and stepped inside. The interior of the house was just as run down as the outside. Dust coated every surface, and the air smelled of mildew and neglect. But there was something else, a faint, metallic scent that made the hairs on the back of Mark's neck stand up. He moved cautiously through the house, his eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. Then, he heard it, a soft, melodic humming coming from upstairs. He froze. The sound was beautiful, haunting, and it sent a chill down his spine. Gathering his courage, Mark made his way up the creaky staircase. The humming grew louder, more distinct, and as he reached the top of the stairs, he saw her. She was sitting by the window, bathed in the soft morning light. Her long, blue hair cascaded down her back, and her skin seemed to glow with an otherworldly radiance. She was beautiful in a way that Mark couldn't quite comprehend, both alien and familiar at the same time. For a moment, he just stood there, watching her. Then, as if sensing his presence, she turned to face him. "You're not afraid," she said, her voice soft and melodic, like the humming he had heard earlier. Mark swallowed hard. I don't know what I am," he admitted. She smiled, a small, sad smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Most people would be terrified." Mark took a step closer. "Who are you?" Her smile faded. "That's a complicated question." Chapter 3. Secrets revealed. Over the next few weeks, Mark found himself drawn to the mysterious woman. Her name, she told him, was Kaya, and though she never explicitly said where she came from, it was clear that she wasn't from Earth. She spoke in riddles, her answers always vague and cryptic, but Mark couldn't help but be fascinated by her. Kaya was unlike anyone he had ever met. She had an air of sadness about her, a deep loneliness that tugged at Mark's heart. She spoke of worlds beyond his imagination, of galaxies and stars that he could never hope to comprehend. Yet, despite her otherworldly nature, there was something deeply human about her. As they spent more time together, Mark found himself growing closer to her. It wasn't just curiosity anymore, there was something deeper, something that he couldn't quite put into words. One evening, as they sat together on the porch of the old house, watching the sun set over the horizon, Mark finally gathered the courage to ask the question that had been burning in his mind. why are you here, Kaya? She was silent for a long time, her eyes fixed on the fading light. Then, she turned to him, her expression unreadable. I was running, she said softly. From what? She hesitated, then sighed. From them. Mark frowned. Who? Kaya looked down at her hands, her fingers tracing the lines of her palm. I wasn't supposed to come here. They don't allow it. But I had to get away. They were going to take me back. Mark's mind raced with questions, but he forced himself to stay calm. Take you back where? Kaya shook her head. It doesn't matter. What matters is that I'm here now. And they'll come for me soon. Chapter 4, The Connection. As the days passed, Mark became more and more aware of the growing connection between him and Kaya. It wasn't just a physical attraction, though there was no denying that he found her beautiful. It was something deeper, something that went beyond the surface. He found himself thinking about her constantly, wondering what her life had been like before she arrived here, what kind of world she had come from. And more than anything, he wondered what would happen when they came for her. One evening, as they sat together in the old house, Kaya reached out and took Mark's hand. Her touch was cool, almost electric, and it sent a shiver down his spine. You've been kind to me, she said softly. More than I deserve. Mark shook his head. You deserve more than you think. Kaya smiled, but there was sadness in her eyes. You don't know what I've done. Chapter 5, The Escape. Mark didn't know when it happened, but at some point, his concern for Kaya turned into something more. He cared about her, deeply, and the thought of losing her terrified him. One night, as they sat together under the stars, Kaya turned to him, her expression serious. They're coming, she said quietly. Mark's heart sank. When? Soon. He didn't know what to say. He didn't want her to go, but he also knew that there was nothing he could do to stop it. She didn't belong here, no matter how much he wanted her to stay. But then, something unexpected happened. Kaya stood up and reached out her hand. Come with me. Mark blinked in surprise. What? Come with me, she repeated. I can't stay here, but I don't want to leave you behind. You've shown me kindness, and I don't want to be alone anymore. Mark stared at her, his mind racing. Could he really leave everything behind? His job, his home, his entire life? Could he really go with her, into the unknown? But when he looked into her eyes, he knew that the answer was yes. Chapter 6, The Decision. Mark lay awake that night, his mind whirling with thoughts of what Kaya had said. Could he really leave everything he knew behind? The thought of leaving his familiar life, his house, his small town, it terrified him. But at the same time, the idea of Kaya leaving without him filled him with a sense of dread far more powerful. He tossed and turned, images of her blue skin glowing in the moonlight haunting his thoughts. She had been so open, so vulnerable when she had asked him to come with her. Mark had never felt a connection this strong with anyone in his life. There was something deeper between them, something that transcended species, worlds, even the boundaries of the life he knew. By morning, his decision was made. He had to go. He couldn't let her leave without him. As soon as the sun began to rise, Mark threw on his clothes and raced to the old house. The door creaked open as he entered, and there she was, sitting by the window, her ethereal beauty even more striking in the soft morning light. Kaya looked up as he entered, her expression unreadable. Mark took a deep breath and walked over to her. I'm coming with you, he said, his voice steady. For a moment, Kaya didn't respond. Then, a small smile tugged at the corners of her lips. I hoped you would, she whispered. Chapter 7, Leaving it all behind. The preparations to leave were surprisingly simple. Kaya didn't have any possessions to take with her, and Mark didn't have much worth holding on to either. His old house, his job, the small town that had been his entire world, it all felt insignificant compared to what lay ahead. They packed only the bare essentials. Mark stuffed a small bag with clothes, some cash, and a few mementos from his life. But the more he packed, the more he realized that none of it really mattered anymore. He was about to embark on a journey that would change his life forever. Kaya had explained very little about where they were going. She had told him that she came from a place far beyond Earth, a place that humans could barely comprehend. She hadn't said much about them, the ones who would be coming for her, only that they wouldn't take kindly to her being on this planet. Mark didn't care. He trusted her. Whatever danger lay ahead, they would face it together. On the night they were set to leave, Kaya stood in the field behind the old house, her blue skin glowing faintly in the moonlight. Mark joined her, his heart pounding with anticipation. She turned to him, her eyes filled with both hope and sorrow. "Once we leave, we can't come back. Are you sure you want this?" Mark nodded. "I've never been more sure of anything." Kaya took his hand, and together, they walked into the darkness. Chapter 8, The Departure. As they walked, the landscape around them began to shift. At first, it was subtle, the air grew colder, the grass beneath their feet felt softer, almost like velvet. But soon, the changes became more dramatic. The trees they passed were taller, their leaves a shimmering silver. The sky above them darkened, filled with unfamiliar constellations. Mark's breath caught in his throat. He had expected something strange, but this was beyond anything he could have imagined. They weren't just leaving his town, they were leaving Earth altogether. "Where are we?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Kaya squeezed his hand. "We're between worlds now. It won't be long before we reach the gateway." Mark didn't know what that meant, but he trusted her. He had to. Suddenly, the ground beneath them began to tremble. Kaya stopped, her eyes narrowing as she looked around. "They've found us," she whispered. Chapter 9, The Pursuit. Before Mark could ask what she meant, a blinding light erupted from the sky. He instinctively shielded his eyes, but even through his squinted vision, he could see them, dark figures descending from the heavens, moving with terrifying speed. "Run!" Kaya shouted, pulling him forward. Mark's legs moved on autopilot as they sprinted through the alien landscape. He didn't know where they were going, but Kaya seemed to have a plan. The ground shook beneath their feet as the figures drew closer, their inhuman screeches piercing the air. His heart pounded in his chest, fear surging through his veins. He had never been in a situation like this before, but there was no time to think, no time to be afraid. All he could do was follow Kaya and hope they could outrun whatever was chasing them. "They're not going to stop," Kaya shouted, her voice strained with panic. "We need to make it to the gateway before they catch us." Mark didn't know what the gateway was, but it was clear that their lives depended on reaching it. Chapter 10, The Gateway. Just when Mark thought his legs were going to give out, he saw it, a shimmering portal standing in the middle of a clearing, pulsating with an eerie, blue light. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, a swirling vortex that seemed to defy the laws of physics. "That's it!" Kaya shouted, pulling him toward it. "We need to go now." Behind them, the dark figures were closing in, their screeches growing louder and more menacing. Mark could feel the heat of their pursuit, the weight of their presence pressing down on him. Without hesitation, Kaya leaped toward the portal, pulling Mark with her. For a brief moment, everything went dark. Chapter 11, A New World. When Mark opened his eyes, he found himself standing in a completely different place. The air here was thin, the sky a deep violet, filled with stars that seemed much closer than they ever did on Earth. The ground beneath his feet was soft and spongy, and the trees around him were unlike anything he had ever seen, tall, with twisting trunks and glowing leaves. He turned to Kaya, who was standing beside him, her blue skin blending in with the strange new environment. "Where are we?" he asked, his voice filled with awe. "This is my world," she said softly. "Welcome to Vealoria." Chapter 12, The Truth. Over the next few days, Mark began to learn more about Kaya's world. Vealoria was beautiful, but it was also dangerous. The people here were different from humans, more advanced in some ways, but also more brutal. Kaya had fled this world because of a conflict, one that Mark was only just beginning to understand. The them she had mentioned before were part of a powerful organization that controlled much of Vealoria. They didn't take kindly to anyone who tried to escape their rule, and Kaya had been running from them for a long time. "They'll keep coming," she told Mark one evening as they sat by a glowing river, the light from the water casting strange shadows across their faces. "They won't stop until they've found me." Mark frowned. "But why? What did you do?" Kaya looked down at her hands, her expression pained. "I refused to follow their orders." I refused to be a part of what they were doing. Mark didn't press her for more details, but it was clear that whatever Kaya had done, it had put them both in serious danger. Chapter 13, The Resistance. As they spent more time in Valoria, Mark began to notice something strange. There were others like Kaya, others who had fled the ruling organization and were hiding in the shadows. It wasn't long before they were approached by a group of rebels, people who wanted to overthrow the regime that had forced Kaya to flee. At first, Mark was hesitant to get involved. He wasn't from this world, and he didn't understand the complexities of their conflict. But Kaya was different. She had a history here, a past that she couldn't escape, and it became clear that if they wanted to survive, they would need allies. The leader of the resistance, a stern-faced man named Arion, explained the situation in simple terms. If we don't stop them, they will destroy everything. They've already started. Villages are disappearing, people vanishing without a trace. We can't stand by and let it happen. Mark wasn't sure how he could help, but he knew one thing: he couldn't stand by and let Kaya fight this battle alone. Chapter 14, The battle begins. The resistance was small, but they were determined. Arion and his group had been planning for years, waiting for the right moment to strike. With Kaya's knowledge of the ruling organization and Mark's newfound determination to fight, they began to prepare for war. Mark had never been a fighter. He had spent most of his life working in a quiet town, far removed from the violence and chaos that was now surrounding him. But Kaya gave him strength. She believed in him, and that was enough. Together, they trained with the resistance, learning how to fight, how to survive. The days were long and grueling, but the bond between Mark and Kaya only grew stronger. They were no longer just running from their enemies, they were preparing to face them head-on. Chapter 15, The attack. The day of the attack came sooner than anyone had expected. The ruling organization had discovered the location of the resistance's hideout, and they launched a full-scale assault, their forces descending from the sky like a swarm of locusts. Mark and Kaya fought side by side, their training kicking in as they faced wave after wave of enemies. The battle was brutal, the air thick with smoke and the screams of the wounded. But they didn't give up. They couldn't. At one point, Mark was knocked to the ground by a powerful blast. His vision blurred, and for a moment, he thought it was over. But then Kaya was there, pulling him to his feet, her eyes fierce with determination. "We're not done yet," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. Chapter 16, Sacrifice. The battle raged on for what felt like hours, but in the end, the resistance was overwhelmed. They had fought valiantly, but the ruling organization's forces were too strong, too numerous. Arion was killed, along with many others, and Mark and Kaya were captured. As they were dragged before the leader of the ruling organization, a tall, imposing figure with cold, unfeeling eyes, Mark felt a sense of despair wash over him. They had come so far, fought so hard, but in the end, it hadn't been enough. But Kaya wasn't ready to give up. Even as they stood before their captor, she refused to back down. "You can kill me," she said, her voice filled with defiance. "But you'll never break me." The leader smiled, a cruel, twisted smile. "We don't need to break you. We only need to make an example of you." Chapter 17, A desperate plan. As they were led away, Mark's mind raced with thoughts of escape. He couldn't let this be the end. Not after everything they had been through. There had to be a way out, a way to save Kaya, to save both of them. As they were thrown into a cell, Mark turned to Kaya, his heart pounding. "We need to get out of here," he whispered. "There has to be a way." Kaya looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Even if we escape, they'll keep coming. They'll never stop." Mark shook his head. "Then we keep running. We keep fighting. We don't give up." For a moment, Kaya was silent. Then, she nodded, a small glimmer of hope in her eyes. "You're right. We can't give up." Chapter 18, The escape. That night, they made their move. Using the skills they had learned during their time with the resistance, Mark and Kaya managed to overpower their guards and escape from the prison. It wasn't easy, every step was fraught with danger, and there were moments when Mark wasn't sure they would make it, but they did. By the time the sun began to rise, they were free, standing on the edge of a vast forest that stretched out before them, its trees glowing faintly in the early morning light. "We did it," Mark said, his voice filled with disbelief. Kaya nodded, but there was no joy in her expression. "This is just the beginning." Chapter 19, On the Run. The next few weeks were a blur of constant movement. Mark and Kaya traveled through the wilds of Vealoria, always staying one step ahead of their pursuers. They knew they couldn't stay in one place for too long. If they did, the ruling organization would find them. But despite the danger, there was a sense of freedom in their journey. For the first time in a long time, they were no longer just running from something, they were running towards something. A future, a life where they could be free. They didn't know where that future would take them, but they knew one thing for sure, they were in it together. Chapter 20, The Revelation. One night, as they sat by a campfire deep in the heart of the forest, Kaya turned to Mark, her expression serious. "There's something I haven't told you," she said quietly. Mark frowned. "What is it?" Kaya hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. "The reason they're chasing me, it's not just because I ran. It's because of who I am." Mark's heart skipped a beat. "Who you are?" Kaya nodded. "I'm not just any fugitive. I'm the daughter of the leader of the ruling organization." Mark stared at her, his mind racing. "What?" Kaya looked away, her expression filled with guilt. "I didn't want to tell you. I didn't want you to think I was like them." Mark was silent for a long time, his thoughts swirling with confusion and disbelief. But then, he reached out and took Kaya's hand. "You're not like them," he said firmly. "You're nothing like them." Chapter 21, The Final Stand. As they continued their journey, the weight of Kaya's revelation hung heavy between them. Mark didn't know what to make of it, but one thing was clear, their fight was far from over. If anything, it had only just begun. The ruling organization wasn't just chasing them because Kaya had fled, they were chasing her because she was a threat. A threat to their power, to their control. And now, Mark was a part of that threat too. They couldn't keep running forever. At some point, they would have to make a stand. They would have to face their enemies head-on and fight for their freedom. Chapter 22, The Final Battle. The final battle came sooner than they had expected. The ruling organization had tracked them down, and this time, there was no escape. Mark and Kaya found themselves surrounded, their backs against the wall, but they didn't give up. They fought with everything they had, their bond stronger than ever. They had come too far to let it end here. The battle was fierce, and for a moment, it seemed like they might not make it. But then, something unexpected happened. The resistance, thought to be defeated, arrived to join the fight. Arion's death had not been in vain, his people had continued the fight, and now they had come to help. With the combined strength of the resistance and Mark and Kaya's determination, they managed to defeat the ruling organization's forces. Chapter 23, A New Beginning. In the aftermath of the battle, Mark and Kaya stood together, their hands intertwined as they looked out over the landscape of Vealoria. The war was over, but the fight for their future was just beginning. For the first time in a long time, they were free. Free to live their lives, free to be together, and as they stood there, under the light of 1,000 stars, Mark knew one thing for sure, no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together.
Chapter 1, Arrival on Earth. Xena was not from Earth. She hailed from a distant planet called Aloria, a place where technology and nature coexisted in perfect harmony. On Aloria, people lived long, peaceful lives. Conflict was rare, and their society was built on respect for the environment and one another. Alorians were known for their distinct appearance, tall, lithe, with smooth, iridescent skin that shimmered in hues of blue and silver under their planet's twin suns. Xena had never planned on visiting Earth. In fact, Earth was barely on the radar of her people, seen as an undeveloped, war-torn planet not worth their time or energy. But a malfunction in her spacecraft during an exploratory mission to a nearby star system had forced her to crash land in a remote part of the planet. The landing had been rough. Her ship had torn through the Earth's atmosphere and crash-landed in what appeared to be a dense forest. The trees were unlike any she'd ever seen, towering and rough, their branches entwining in a chaotic pattern. A mist hung in the air, and the sounds of unfamiliar creatures echoed through the woods. As Xena emerged from her damaged vessel, her body tingling with the aftereffects of the crash, she noticed that her breathing apparatus was no longer necessary. The atmosphere on Earth was similar enough to Aloria's that she could survive without assistance. However, she was now stranded, with her ship's navigation system destroyed, and no immediate means of communication with her home planet. Xena took a deep breath, her senses overwhelmed by the rich scent of Earth's foliage. The air was thick with moisture, and it was unlike anything she had experienced before. She needed to explore her surroundings, gather resources, and find a way to repair her ship. Little did she know, her encounter with Earth would not be as simple as she anticipated. Chapter 2, The Encounter. It wasn't long before Xena stumbled upon something unusual, an isolated research facility hidden deep within the forest. The building was made of metal and glass, a stark contrast to the natural environment around it. Xena's curiosity got the better of her, and she decided to approach. As she crept closer, her heightened senses picked up the distinct hum of machines inside the facility. Human voices, muffled but unmistakable, drifted toward her from the building's interior. She crouched low, her blue skin blending into the shadows of the night, and watched from a distance. Inside, a group of scientists was working on a secret project. They had been experimenting with pheromones, chemical substances that could manipulate emotions and behavior. The research was cutting edge, funded by a shadowy government organization that sought to weaponize the power of pheromones for their own gain. One of the researchers, Dr. Alex Carter, was particularly engrossed in his work. He had been obsessed with understanding how pheromones could influence attraction and emotion. For months, he had been testing various formulas, trying to perfect the chemical combination that could make someone irresistibly drawn to another person. However, his experiments had only yielded mixed results. As Xena observed from the shadows, a sense of foreboding filled her. She felt the need to leave, but her curiosity held her in place. Unbeknownst to her, one of the pheromone vials inside the facility had been left unsecured. The vial, containing the most potent formula Alex had developed, was about to become the catalyst for a series of unforeseen events. Chapter 3, A Dangerous Mistake. Xena's attention was drawn to a flicker of movement near the entrance of the facility. A tall man in a lab coat, Dr. Alex, was stepping outside to take a breath of fresh air. The door hissed shut behind him, and as he stretched and took in the night air, he didn't notice the vial that slipped from his pocket. It hit the ground, shattering upon impact. A cloud of fine, pink mist erupted from the broken vial, carried by the night breeze. Xena was too close to react in time. The pheromone-laced mist enveloped her, and she instinctively inhaled. Her alien biology reacted immediately, but in ways neither she nor the humans could have predicted. The chemical compounds in the pheromone had been designed for humans, but on Xena, the effect was far more intense. Her senses were suddenly overwhelmed, her heart raced, her skin flushed, and her body temperature spiked. A strange sensation surged through her, a mixture of confusion and raw, primal attraction. The pheromone had triggered something deep within her alien physiology, amplifying her natural instincts. Xena stumbled back, her body trembling as the pheromone continued to work its way through her system. She was unfamiliar with these emotions, intense attraction, desire, and an overwhelming need to be close to someone. But who? Her eyes fell on Alex, who was oblivious to what had just happened. He was still standing outside, gazing at the stars, unaware that an alien being was watching him from the shadows. To Xena, Alex was now the center of her universe. She had to be near him, touch him, understand this strange connection that had formed between them. Before she could stop herself, Xena moved closer. Chapter 4, Uncontrollable Urges. The world seemed to narrow down to a single point for Xena. Everything around her, the sounds of the forest, the stars above, even the cool night air, became irrelevant. All that mattered was the man standing just a few meters away. Every step she took toward him felt like a magnetic pull she couldn't resist. Her instincts, heightened by the pheromones, urged her forward, driven by an attraction so intense it bordered on overwhelming. Inside the facility, the other scientists were still unaware of the vial's accident. Alex, too, was completely oblivious to the fact that he was now the object of an alien's obsession. As Xena reached the edge of the clearing, a surge of emotion hit her with the force of a tidal wave. Her alien biology was struggling to adapt to the flood of chemicals coursing through her veins. She wanted to communicate, to explain to this man what had happened, but words, alien or otherwise, escaped her. Her mind was a fog of need, driven by the pheromones' effects. Suddenly, Alex turned, their eyes met, and in that moment, something shifted in the air between them. Alex froze, his gaze locked on Xena's form as she emerged from the shadows. She was unlike anything he had ever seen, her blue skin glistening in the moonlight, her eyes wide with an intensity that sent a chill down his spine. But instead of fear, Alex felt an odd sense of curiosity. "Who? What are you?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Xena couldn't answer. Her heart was pounding, her breath ragged. She was so close to him now that she could feel the warmth of his body, hear the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. She reached out a hand, trembling, and touched his arm. The moment her fingers made contact with his skin, a jolt of electricity shot through both of them. Alex gasped, and Xena's body shuddered with the intensity of the connection. The pheromones had formed an invisible bond between them, one that neither of them could fully comprehend. Chapter 5, A Bond Unleashed. For the next several moments, the world around them seemed to blur into nothingness. Xena's hand lingered on Alex's arm, and in that simple touch, she felt a flood of emotions she didn't recognize: desire, longing, and an almost unbearable need to be near him. The pheromone had forged an unbreakable link between them, amplifying her feelings to a level that was almost painful. Alex, for his part, was equally confused. He felt drawn to this strange, otherworldly woman in ways that defied logic. He could see the intensity in her eyes, the desperation behind her actions. But at the same time, he felt an inexplicable sense of calm in her presence. "What are you doing?" he managed to ask, his voice shaky. Xena's breath hitched, and for the first time, she found herself speaking in the human tongue. I don't know," she admitted, her voice a soft, melodic tone that surprised even her. "I need to be close to you." Alex's heart raced. He knew something was wrong, something unnatural had happened here, but he couldn't bring himself to pull away from her. The connection between them felt too strong, too intense. It was as though they were being held together by some unseen force. Without thinking, Alex reached out and took her hand in his. The moment their fingers intertwined, a surge of energy pulsed between them, leaving both of them breathless. It was a feeling unlike anything Alex had ever experienced, and he could tell that Xena felt the same. "I don't understand," he whispered. "Why do I feel like this?" Xena shook her head, her silver hair shimmering in the moonlight. "It's the pheromone," she said, her voice trembling. "It's affecting me, affecting us. I didn't mean for this to happen." Alex's brow furrowed. "Pheromone? You mean, the one we've been experimenting with?" Xena nodded. "Yes. Your pheromone interacted with my biology in ways I couldn't predict. Now I can't control it." Chapter 6, The Chase for Control. The reality of their situation was beginning to sink in for both of them. Xena was a highly advanced alien, with powers and abilities beyond what any human could comprehend, yet she was completely at the mercy of a chemical reaction that had been set in motion by a simple accident. For Alex, the idea that he had unwittingly caused this intense attraction between them was both thrilling and terrifying. He had always been fascinated by his research, but this was something else entirely. "We need to fix this," Xena said suddenly, her voice filled with urgency. "If we don't, the pheromones will continue to affect us. We might lose control." Alex nodded, his mind racing. "Right. We can't let that happen." Together, they hurried back inside the facility, where the other scientists were still unaware of the chaos that was about to unfold. The pheromones' effects were only beginning to manifest, but already, Alex could feel his thoughts becoming clouded, his judgment skewed by his desire for Xena. They had to find a way to reverse the effects before it was too late. Chapter 7, the price of attraction. The pheromones' influence had begun to spread throughout the facility, affecting not just Xena and Alex but everyone inside. As the night wore on, the attraction between them grew stronger, more uncontrollable. They were drawn to each other like magnets, unable to resist the pull of their bond, but as they worked to find a solution, they began to realize that the pheromone had deeper consequences than they had anticipated. It wasn't just creating physical attraction, it was altering their emotions, changing the way they felt about each other. For Xena, who had never experienced love or desire in the way humans did, the feelings were overwhelming. She had always been logical, analytical, but now she was consumed by emotions she didn't understand. For Alex, the attraction had turned into something more. He was beginning to fall for her, despite knowing that their connection was artificial, the result of a chemical accident. They both knew they had to find a way to break the bond, but as the days passed, the line between reality and pheromone-induced emotion began to blur. Would they be able to undo the damage, or was their fate sealed by the pheromone's power? Chapter 8, A Fragile Future. The resolution to their situation came at a high cost. After days of searching, they finally found a way to counteract the effects of the pheromone. It took every ounce of Xena's alien technology and Alex's scientific expertise, but they managed to create an antidote. But as the pheromone's influence began to fade, so too did the intensity of their connection. The bond that had once seemed unbreakable was now fragile, hanging by a thread. Xena and Alex stood together in the lab, the antidote coursing through their veins. They could feel the difference immediately. The overwhelming attraction was gone, replaced by a quiet sense of understanding. But what did that mean for them? Would their connection survive without the pheromone's influence? "I guess this is goodbye," Xena said softly, her eyes meeting Alex's. Alex nodded, his heart heavy. "Yeah. I guess it is." They stood in silence for a moment, neither of them wanting to say the words, but knowing it was inevitable. "I'll never forget you," Xena whispered, her voice barely audible. "Neither will I," Alex replied, his voice filled with emotion. And with that, Xena turned and walked away, leaving Alex standing in the empty lab, the weight of their experience heavy on his shoulders. As she disappeared into the night, Alex couldn't help but wonder if their bond had been real after all, or if it had simply been a product of the pheromone. In the end, it didn't matter. What mattered was the connection they had shared, however brief, and the impact it had on both of them. And as Xena's ship finally lifted off from Earth, she knew that she would carry a piece of Alex with her, no matter where her journey took her. Chapter 9, The Distance Between Worlds. As Xena soared through the endless expanse of space, her thoughts wandered back to Earth and to Alex. The antidote had neutralized the pheromone's effects, but the memories remained. The feelings she had experienced during their time together were not easily forgotten. For an Elorian, emotions were far more complex than the fleeting sensations that humans described. They were deep, intertwined with the very essence of her being. Though the attraction had faded, something deeper had been stirred within her, something that could not be undone. Her ship's systems whirred around her as she set course back to her home planet of Eloria. The stars glittered outside the cockpit, an endless sea of light that she had navigated many times before. Yet, for the first time in her life, space felt lonely. Xena had never expected to feel this way, this sense of loss, this strange yearning for a place she had once considered insignificant. But it wasn't the planet itself that called to her, it was the connection she had shared with Alex. The pheromone may have triggered the initial bond between them, but there had been something real underneath it all, something she had never experienced with anyone on Eloria. She shook her head, trying to push the thoughts away. She was an explorer, a scientist, not someone who allowed emotions to cloud her judgment. But no matter how hard she tried, the image of Alex, his warmth, his curiosity, his determination, kept returning to her mind. Chapter 10, Life on Eloria. Upon her return to Eloria, Xena was greeted with the familiar sights and sounds of her homeworld. The twin suns bathed the landscape in a soft, golden light, and the air was filled with the hum of nature and advanced technology working in perfect harmony. Eloria was a utopia by all standards, a place where conflict was rare, and life was peaceful. Xena resumed her duties as an intergalactic researcher, studying various planets and ecosystems across the galaxy. Her colleagues welcomed her back, eager to hear about her latest findings. But when she spoke of Earth, she found herself omitting key details about Alex, the pheromone accident, and the emotions that had lingered long after. Life on Eloria was as it had always been, structured, serene, predictable. Yet, Xena found herself feeling restless. She had spent her entire life focused on logic and scientific discovery, but now, for the first time, she wondered what it would be like to live a life driven by emotion, by connection. Chapter 11. A message from Earth. Several months passed, and Xena tried her best to move on. She buried herself in her work, exploring new star systems and documenting alien life forms. But Earth and Alex were never far from her thoughts. One day, as Xena was preparing for another expedition, a transmission came through her ship's communication system. She froze as she saw the origin of the message. Earth.it was from Alex. Her heart raced as she opened the message. It was brief, but it was enough to make her pulse quicken. Xena, I don't know if this message will reach you, but I had to try. I've thought about you every day since you left. I can't shake the feeling that there's more to what we experienced than just the pheromone. I don't know if you feel the same, but I had to let you know. I hope you're well, wherever you are. Xena stared at the message for a long time, her mind racing. She had left Earth thinking that their connection had been purely a result of the pheromone's effects, but now she wasn't so sure. Alex's words stirred something deep within her, something she had tried to suppress since the day she left. Without thinking, Xena activated the reply function. Alex, I received your message. I have thought about you too, more than I expected. I am unsure of what we experienced, but I know that it has stayed with me. Perhaps, it was more than just the pheromone. She hesitated for a moment, then pressed send. Chapter 12, A New Beginning. Back on Earth, Alex had nearly given up hope of hearing from Xena again. He had sent the message on a whim, not expecting a response. But when his computer beeped, signaling an incoming transmission, his heart leapt as he read Xena's reply, and a slow smile spread across his face. Maybe their connection had been more than just a chemical reaction. Maybe, despite their vast differences, there was something real between them. As the days passed, Alex and Xena began exchanging more messages. They shared details about their lives, their worlds, their thoughts on what had happened between them. With each message, the bond between them grew stronger. They realized that while the pheromone had sparked their initial attraction, the feelings that followed were their own. They talked about the possibility of seeing each other again. It wasn't easy. Xena's duties on Eloria kept her busy, and Alex had his work on Earth. But they both knew that they couldn't leave things unresolved. Chapter 13, The Reunion. Months later, Xena found herself back on Earth. She had used her advanced technology to arrange a temporary visit, ensuring that her arrival would go unnoticed by the human authorities. As her ship touched down in the same forest where she had first crash-landed, a sense of anticipation filled her. Alex was waiting for her. When she stepped out of the ship, their eyes met, and for a moment, it was as if no time had passed. The emotions they had both tried to suppress came rushing back, stronger than ever. Without a word, Alex stepped forward and pulled Xena into a tight embrace. She hesitated for only a moment before wrapping her arms around him, the warmth of his body grounding her in a way she hadn't expected. I wasn't sure you'd come, Alex whispered against her hair. I wasn't sure either, Xena replied softly. But I had to see you again. They stood there for what felt like an eternity, neither of them wanting to let go. The connection they had shared, born from an accident, had grown into something real, something undeniable. Chapter 14, Building Bridges. Over the next few days, Alex and Xena spent their time together exploring the human world. Xena was fascinated by Earth's culture, its people, its chaotic beauty. Alex, in turn, was captivated by Xena's insights into the universe, her wisdom, and her strength. They talked about their future, knowing that their lives existed in different worlds, but also realizing that they didn't have to be separated by distance. With Xena's advanced technology, communication was possible, and visits could be arranged. For now, they had each other, and that was enough. As the sun set on their final day together, they sat side by side, watching the stars appear in the sky above. The bond between them had been tested by distance, by uncertainty, but it had only grown stronger. I'll come back, Xena promised, her hand resting on Alex's. "I'll be here," Alex replied with a smile, and as they sat there, gazing up at the stars, they knew that no matter where the universe took them, they would always find their way back to each other. Chapter 15, A Love Beyond Worlds. Xena returned to Aloria, but this time, things felt different. She no longer felt the same sense of isolation she had before. Her bond with Alex had given her a new perspective on life, one that embraced both logic and emotion. She continued her work as an explorer, but she also made time for Alex, visiting him whenever she could. Their love was not conventional, not bound by the rules of Earth or Aloria, but it was theirs. And in the vastness of the universe, they had found something truly rare, a connection that transcended worlds. As the years passed, their relationship deepened. They faced challenges, of course, their lives were still vastly different, and there were moments of doubt. But through it all, they held on to the bond that had brought them together. In the end, it wasn't the pheromone that had created their love. It was something far more powerful, something that neither science nor logic could fully explain. It was the love between two beings from different worlds, a love that had defied the odds and blossomed in the most unexpected of places. And as they continued their journey through the stars, they knew that no matter where the universe took them, their love would remain, a beacon of light in the vastness of space. Chapter 1, The Encounter. The alien girl stood in the sterile, futuristic lounge of a hidden spacecraft, her blue-tinted skin shimmering under the soft, diffused lights that filled the room. Her sharp, luminous eyes scanned the human before her, unimpressed by the false bravado he attempted to maintain. The air was still, but the tension was palpable as her entourage, equally enigmatic and dangerously beautiful, watched from the background, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. "Human," she spoke in a voice that was at once melodic and chilling, her gaze piercing through him as though she could see past his skin and bones. "Show what you're hiding under your clothes, dirty animal." Her words were not a request but a command, underlined by a layer of contempt that only heightened the divide between them. The man stood frozen, his mind racing. He had been captured by these alien women, these ethereal beings with their perfect forms and flawless beauty, only hours ago. The technology they possessed was beyond anything he had ever seen, even beyond anything his government had dared to dream of. He was a spy, an expert at uncovering secrets, but now he stood on the other side of the game, a mouse in a trap. What do you mean?" he stammered, trying to buy himself a few seconds to think. The alien girl narrowed her eyes, her lips curving into a mocking smile. She moved closer, the silver-white strands of her hair falling elegantly around her flawless face. "You know what I mean, human. There's no use pretending. We've seen what you hide beneath those rags you call clothing. We've studied your kind for longer than you can comprehend." He swallowed hard. Was it some kind of advanced scanning technology? Did they know about the hidden transmitter embedded in his skin? Or was it something deeper, something more primal they sought to uncover? The others in the room moved closer as well, their movements synchronized and graceful, like predators circling prey. They had him surrounded, and escape seemed impossible. His heart pounded in his chest, not only from fear but from the overwhelming presence of these beings. Their beauty was unnatural, almost painful to behold, like looking directly into the sun. "Do as she says, human," one of the others hissed softly, her voice carrying the same disdain as the leader. "Show us your secrets." Chapter 2, Secrets Unveiled. The man hesitated, his hands shaking as they reached for the zipper of his jacket. He glanced nervously around the room, looking for any opportunity to make a break for it, but there was none. Even if he could escape the room, where would he go? He was on their ship, possibly light years away from Earth. His only chance was to comply, to figure out what they wanted. He unzipped the jacket slowly, revealing a simple black shirt underneath. His body was tense, and his mind was racing. Beneath the fabric of his clothing, just under his skin, lay the transmitter, a device so small that even the most advanced Earth technology couldn't detect it. But these aliens, they were different. They had scanned him, examined him, and yet, they hadn't made a move to remove the device. What were they really after? As he peeled off the shirt, he could feel their eyes on him, not in a way that felt voyeuristic, but as if they were analyzing every muscle, every pore, every heartbeat. Their expressions were unreadable, their perfect faces giving nothing away. The alien leader, the one who had spoken first, stepped even closer. Her icy blue eyes locked onto his bare skin as if searching for something unseen. "You think we're interested in your primitive weapons, your crude technology," she scoffed, her voice dripping with superiority. "We're not here for your tools, human. We're here for something much more valuable. Something your kind has yet to understand." His heart skipped a beat. What could they possibly want? What could he have that was more valuable than the intelligence he carried? "You still don't see it, do you?" she continued, tilting her head slightly, as if amused by his confusion. "We're not interested in what you hide under your clothes. We're interested in what you hide under your skin, under your mind." Chapter 3, The Mind Trap. The words hit him like a freight train. His mind? They wanted something from his mind. The fear intensified, but so did the questions. How could they access his thoughts, his memories? Was this some form of telepathy? The leader reached out, her hand hovering just above his chest. He could feel a strange energy emanating from her, a force that made the hair on his arms stand up. She didn't touch him, but it felt as if she was pulling something from him, something deep within. "You carry it within you," she whispered, her voice barely audible, but her words thundered in his ears. "The key to the future. The key to our survival. Your kind doesn't even know it yet, but we do. And we will take it." His thoughts raced as he struggled to understand what she was talking about. What could he possibly carry that these advanced beings needed? His head throbbed with the strain of trying to piece it all together, and then, as if a switch had been flipped, he remembered the dream. The dream he had had every night since he was a child. It was always the same, a vast, endless expanse of stars and a voice calling to him from the void. A voice that promised answers, power, but also danger. He had always dismissed it as a recurring nightmare, a product of his overactive imagination. But now, standing before these alien beings, it felt like something more. "Ah," the leader said softly, a smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "You're beginning to understand." He shook his head, trying to push the thoughts away, but it was too late. The connection had been made, and the aliens were pulling the memories from him, unraveling the mystery that had haunted him his entire life. Chapter 4, A Dangerous Bargain. The leader stepped back, her expression unreadable, but there was a glint of satisfaction in her eyes. "You've been chosen, human," she said, her voice carrying a weight that sent chills down his spine. "Whether you like it or not, you are the key. You will help us survive, or you will die." His throat was dry, and his voice cracked when he spoke. What do you want from me?" The alien girl didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked at him with a mixture of pity and amusement. "You think you have a choice in this?" she asked softly. "You're already part of the plan." Before he could respond, the others moved in closer, their glowing eyes locking onto him like vultures circling their prey. There was no escape, no bargaining. They had made up their minds, and his fate was sealed. The leader leaned in, her breath cool against his skin. "We will extract what we need, but there's a way for you to survive. A way for you to become more than you are." His heart pounded in his chest. "What are you talking about?" "You help us," she said simply. "Become one of us. And in return, we will give you what your kind has always sought, immortality." Chapter 5, The Transformation. The man's mind reeled. Immortality? Become one of them? The offer was both terrifying and tempting. Could he trust them? Could he survive whatever it was they had planned for him? The thought of living forever, of transcending his human limitations, was a dream many had, but at what cost? The leader's eyes softened slightly, as if sensing his hesitation. "This is your only chance, human. The process will change you, yes, but you will retain your memories, your essence. You will become something greater." He thought of Earth, of the people he had left behind. Could he abandon them for the promise of eternal life? Could he betray his own species? But then again, did it matter? He was already a prisoner on this ship, surrounded by beings who could crush him without a second thought. The others in the room watched silently, their expressions unreadable. They were waiting for his decision, and time was running out. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "What do I have to do?" Chapter 6, The Ritual. The leader smiled, a look of triumph flashing in her eyes. "You've made the right choice." She stepped back, and the others moved forward, forming a circle around him. The lights in the room dimmed, and a low hum filled the air. The man's heart raced as he realized he was about to undergo something far beyond his understanding. The leader raised her arms, and the energy in the room shifted. He could feel it pressing down on him, invading his mind, his body. His skin tingled, and he gasped as the sensation intensified, spreading through his veins like wildfire. His vision blurred, and the room around him began to dissolve. He was no longer standing in the alien ship but floating in a vast, star-filled void. The voice from his dreams echoed around him, calling him, beckoning him forward. "You are the key," it whispered. "You are the beginning and the end." His body trembled as the energy consumed him, reshaping him, transforming him into something new. His mind expanded, and for the first time in his life, he saw the universe for what it truly was, an endless web of possibilities, a never-ending cycle of life and death. Chapter 7, The New Beginning. When he awoke, he was no longer the man he had been. His skin shimmered with the same blue hue as the aliens around him, and his eyes glowed with the same ethereal light. He was one of them now, but he was also something more. The leader stood before him, her expression unreadable. "Welcome to your new life," she said softly. He looked down at his hands, flexing his fingers. He could feel the power coursing through him, the knowledge of the universe at his fingertips. But there was also a heaviness, a burden that came with his new existence. "What now?" he asked, his voice steady but laced with uncertainty. The leader smiled, but it was a cold, distant smile. "Now, you serve us. Together, we will reshape the universe." And with those words, he knew there was no turning back. He had made his choice, and the cost of immortality was higher than he could have ever imagined. The alien girl watched him closely, her piercing eyes never leaving his as she whispered, "Welcome to eternity, human." Chapter 8, The Weight of Eternity. The realization of what he had become settled heavily on his shoulders as he gazed into the infinite darkness of space through the ship's transparent wall. His reflection stared back at him, a being of immense power, glowing with the same eerie blue light as the alien leader and her kin. Yet, beneath the surface, he was still human, still tethered to the thoughts, feelings, and fears that once defined him. The alien leader, who had orchestrated his transformation, stood beside him, her posture calm and commanding. She regarded him not as a newly created equal but as a tool, a weapon to be wielded in their quest for dominance. "You must accept your new role, human," she said softly, her eyes never wavering from the stars. "The power you now possess can either be your salvation or your destruction." He swallowed hard, feeling the unfamiliar energy coursing through his veins. "I don't know what you expect me to do," he admitted, his voice betraying his uncertainty. The leader turned toward him, her expression unreadable. "You are the key, as I've said before. Your very existence is now intertwined with the fate of the universe. We have battled for eons, fought against forces you cannot begin to comprehend. And now, with you by our side, we will tip the balance." He shook his head, trying to comprehend the magnitude of her words. "But why me? Why was I chosen? I was just a man. A spy." She placed a hand on his shoulder, and though her touch was light, it felt as though it carried the weight of the cosmos. "Because you carry within you a unique energy, a potential that even your own kind cannot see. Your dreams, your visions, they were not mere coincidences. They were the universe calling to you, preparing you for this moment." He took a step back, overwhelmed by the truth she revealed. The dreams he had experienced throughout his life, the voice calling to him from the void, it had all been leading to this. But what did it mean for his humanity? Was there any part of him left that wasn't already claimed by this alien force? "I don't want to lose who I am," he whispered, more to himself than to her. The leader's eyes softened slightly, but there was no pity in her voice when she replied, "You've already lost who you were. But in return, you've gained something far greater: immortality, power, and a purpose that stretches beyond the boundaries of any human life. The question is whether you will embrace it or fight against it." He stared at her, feeling the weight of her words, the weight of his new existence. In a way, she was right. He couldn't go back to the man he once was, but that didn't mean he had to abandon everything. There had to be a way to retain his humanity while wielding this newfound power. "I'll help you," he said slowly, the decision forming in his mind. "But on my terms." The leader's lips curved into a knowing smile. "We shall see." Chapter 9. The first mission days passed aboard the alien ship, and with each passing hour, he grew more accustomed to his new body, his new abilities. The transformation had granted him enhanced strength, speed, and intellect. His mind now operated on a level far beyond that of any human, and he could access information and knowledge stored in the ship's vast database with ease. Yet, even as he honed his abilities, the lingering question of what it meant to be human gnawed at him. He hadn't spoken much with the other aliens on the ship, most of whom viewed him with a mixture of curiosity and indifference. They saw him as a tool, just as their leader did, a means to an end. But one alien, a woman named Zyra, seemed different. She often watched him from a distance, her expression unreadable. Her blue skin shimmered in the same light as the others, but there was something more in her eyes, a depth of understanding that intrigued him. One day, as he trained in the ship's expansive gymnasium, pushing his new body to its limits, she approached him. "You struggle," Zyra said, her voice calm but with an edge of empathy. He wiped the sweat from his brow, though he suspected his new physiology made sweat unnecessary. "I don't know how to balance this. I'm not like you. I wasn't born into this life. I had a family, friends, a home." Zyra tilted her head, her luminous eyes narrowing slightly. "You are not like us. But that is why you are valuable." He frowned. "Valuable? To your mission, maybe. But what about to myself? What am I if not the man I used to be?" She took a step closer, her eyes locking onto his. "You are more than the man you were. But you are still him. The transformation didn't erase your past, it enhanced it. You carry your memories, your emotions, with you. They are your strength, not your weakness." Her words struck a chord within him, and for the first time since his transformation, he felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps there was a way to reconcile his old self with his new identity. Perhaps there was still a part of him worth saving. Before he could respond, the ship's intercom crackled to life, and the voice of the leader echoed through the chamber. "All personnel to the command deck. We have located the target." He felt a surge of adrenaline as Zyra's expression hardened. "It's time." Chapter 10. The infiltration. The command deck was alive with activity as he and Zyra entered. The leader stood at the center of the room, her eyes fixed on the holographic display before her. The image of a distant planet, shrouded in clouds and mystery, floated in the air, a world that had been the center of conflict for millennia. "We have found them," the leader announced, her voice commanding the attention of everyone present. "The renegade faction responsible for the destabilization of our galaxy. And with our new ally," she glanced at him, "we will crush them once and for all." His heart pounded as he stared at the holographic planet. This was it, the moment he had been preparing for. But as the mission details unfolded, doubts crept into his mind. What exactly was he fighting for? And why did this mission feel more personal to the leader than any of the others had let on? As the team prepared for the mission, Zyra pulled him aside. "Be careful," she warned, her voice low. "The leader has her own agenda. Don't trust everything she tells you." He frowned, feeling a knot of tension form in his chest. "What do you mean?" Zyra hesitated, her eyes darting toward the leader. There's more to this mission than she's revealed. I've seen the way she looks at you, the way she speaks about the key. You're important, but not in the way she wants you to believe. She's using you for something far greater than just this battle. His mind raced, trying to process her words. Could it be true? Could the leader's motivations go beyond the mission she had outlined? And if so, what was he really fighting for? Before he could ask more, the ship's alarms blared, signaling that they were approaching their destination. There was no more time for questions, only action. Chapter 11, Betrayal. The descent to the planet was swift and silent. He and Zyra, along with the rest of the strike team, moved through the dense atmosphere, cloaked by the ship's advanced stealth technology. The renegades were unaware of their approach, and the element of surprise was on their side. As they landed on the surface, the air was thick with tension. The mission was clear: eliminate the renegade leaders and secure the planet. But as they moved deeper into enemy territory, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't until they reached the heart of the enemy base that the truth was revealed. The leader, who had been at the front of the strike team, suddenly turned to face him, her eyes blazing with intensity. "Now, human," she said, her voice echoing through his mind. "It is time for you to fulfill your purpose." Before he could react, she reached out and touched his forehead, and in that moment, the truth flooded his consciousness that he wasn't just a key to the mission, he was the key to unlocking a power that had been sealed away for eons. A power that the leader had been seeking for herself, hidden within him since birth. She had orchestrated everything: his capture, his transformation, all to bring him to this moment. Betrayal burned in his chest as he realized the extent of her manipulation. But even as the anger surged within him, he felt the power she had unlocked coursing through his veins, more potent than anything he had ever imagined.